all their stages forthwith.
Honorable members, the question is that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Motions relating to the business or sittings of the Senate.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President.
Honorable members, the question is that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Public business, government business motion.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, this is the resolution authorizing the ratification by Belize of the agreement between the government of Belize and the government of the United States of America for cooperation regarding the examination of protection requests, motion 2025. Madam President, I move that whereas the agreement between the government of Belize and the government of the United States of America for cooperation regarding the examination of protection requests was signed in Belmopan on the 20th October 2025, herein referred to as the agreement. And whereas the purpose of this agreement was to set a broad framework for cooperation between Belize and the United States of America to ensure the dignified, safe, and timely transfer from the United States of America of third country nationals who may seek protection against their return to their home country or country of former habitual residence. And whereas the government of Belize is desirous of ratifying the agreement pursuant to Article 7.1, and whereas Section 6.1a subsection 2A of the Belize Constitution, as amended by the Belize Constitution 6th Amendment Act number 13 of 2008, provides that the Senate shall authorize the ratification of any treaty by the government of Belize. Now therefore be resolved that this Senate authorizes the government of Belize to ratify the agreement between Belize and the United States of America for cooperation regarding the examination of protection requests. To start off the debate on this motion, Madam President, senators are being asked to discharge its very important constitutional duty to consider and authorize the ratification of the agreement between Belize and the United States of America for cooperation regarding examination of protection requests. The agreement, as has been indicated before, was entered into on the 20th of October this year. So senators essentially are being asked to trigger or to start the process for the implementation and operationalization of this agreement. Madam President, as senators will know, the foreign minister gave a statement in the other place on the 17th of October, outlining and giving a backdrop of the agreement. And on Monday last, the Committee of the Whole met, and additional details were provided to senators. I attended then, along with Ambassador Borland, to provide further details and clarity about the framework agreement. So, Madam President, the question may be asked, what is the impetus for us as a nation to have entered into this agreement? The answer, Madam President, stares us right in the face. It is the same reasons that would have driven us as a nation to become a party to the 1984 Convention Against Torture and Other Treatment or Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Penalties, or the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, or the 1967 Protocol relating to the status of refugees. And it is for these reasons these conventions, Madam President, are catalogued in the preamble of the agreement. For preambles, Madam President, found in these legal documents, they provide the reason or as the French would say, the raison d'etre behind them. It lies, Madam President, out of our common humanity. It is premised on an awareness and an acceptance of common humanity and the obligation to assist with mitigating strife of fellow humans. For this framework agreement is an offshoot of these shared common ideals of nations in respect of persons who have been driven from their homeland or fled their homeland and who have had to seek refuge elsewhere. Now, of course, Madam President, we know that it is not every and anyone you give refuge to, or not every and anyone you let in your home. And this is precisely why, Madam President, the government has ensured that the agreement that has been signed has a number of safeguards to protect the interests and security of Belize, including, as the Foreign Minister has stated, restrictions on nationalities that can be transferred. That is to say, it being limited to CARICOM nationals and Central American nationals, excluding Guatemalans. There's also the safeguard of consideration of professional skills and criminal record of the intended transferees. There's also a cap on annual number of possible applicants. Further, there is a right of the government to terminate or suspend the agreement at any time. And finally, the agreement, the life of the agreement is limited to 2 years. Madam President, I wish to make the point that these types of agreements are not unusual. While it is true that asylum seekers and refugees ordinarily have their application process where they arrive at, as the United Nations Human Rights Commission for Refugees, however, explained in its guidance notes on these bilateral transfer agreements, there is an increasing number of these initiatives which are aimed at enhancing international regional cooperation, at fostering and creating a space for those who have had to take refuge elsewhere. The United States, for instance, has entered into similar type agreements with countries such as Canada and Guyana. Significantly, Madam President, the agreement cannot and will not be operationalized until and unless the parties have developed operating procedures which contain gradual steps and address, among other things, procedures necessary to effectuate and transfer of the individuals under the agreement, and B, institutional capacity requirement. For senators, this can be found at Article 4 of the agreement. Of course, Madam President, the process of crafting and finalizing these operating procedures cannot be done until and unless the Senate authorizes the ratification of the agreement, until the Senate authorizes the triggering of the provisions of the agreement. Finally, Madam President, the agreement cannot come into force until and unless all domestic legal procedures have been complied with, which will include amendment to the Refugees Act. This means, Madam President, where this Honorable Senate, in accordance with Section 61A 2A, to authorize the ratification of the agreement, this Senate will at a later day have further opportunity to examine and consider the agreement and details of the operating procedures. I therefore, Madam President, commend to this Honorable Chamber the motion, and on this side we respectfully urge Senators to support the motion and to authorize the ratification of the agreement. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Patrick Forber.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, colleagues. Madam President, with your permission, I'd like to join myself to the comments made by the lead government senator today on congratulating the Most Reverend Philip Wright. Doric Wright, my friend, was his cousin, and another well-known cousin of his is yours truly. So I congratulate Bishop Philip as he's elevated to the position of Archbishop, a position which is well recognized not only in the region but also in the wider Anglican communion worldwide. And I think Belizeans should know that Bishop Philip becomes the first Belizean born to ascend to this position. Belize once had, well, not Belize, but British Honduras once had its bishop, one of Bishop Philip's predecessors, the Most Reverend Edward Arthur Dunn, who was Archbishop back in the 30s to the 40s, I think. But of course, Archbishop Dunn was not a born Belizean. So we feel that it is a tremendously big deal that our very own Bishop Philip is elevated to this position. And we ask the nation's prayers, and I join with my Senate colleagues to offer the Anglican Diocese of Belize its congratulations, and of course, we give our prayers and our best wishes to the Most Reverend Philip Wright, Metropolitan and Primate of the Church in the province of the West Indies. It's nice to say that it has a nice ring. Thank you, Madam President. On the matter of Belize being a safe third country, or agreeing to be a safe third country, Madam President, let me say from the onset that we on this side have grave concerns. And we have voiced these concerns out in the public by way of our press conferences, but we've now come to a position where we must put our voices officially on the record to say what we feel about this particular agreement. First of all, Madam President, we believe that it terribly lacks transparency and consultation, public consultation, but also even consultation with us in here. The lead senator for the government stated that indeed there was a session, which was a committee of the whole Senate, where information was shared. But what he did not tell you, Madam President, is that, well, of course he didn't have to tell you why, but you saw for yourself that while it is the guise was that this would be additional information that would help us better understand what this agreement is about, colleagues on this side of the House feel, and honest colleagues on that side of the House would be forced to tell you that we are no clearer on what this agreement brings after having listened to testimony by the Attorney General, who today sits as lead government senator, and as well the Ambassador Borland, who, through no fault of hers, she has her, I don't want to call it masters, but she has her people who she has to listen to. The foreign minister is her boss. We are no clearer on what the intricacies, what the details are, if you will, Madam President, of this agreement. The agreement, we first heard of it via, believe it or not, Madam President, the U.S. Embassy chargé d'affaires. It was not even our own government who came to us and said, listen, we are engaging with the United States in order to try to sign off on this agreement. And that, Madam President, was just a few days. In fact, if you count the weekend, it was just literally 2 days or so before the signing of the agreement on October 20th. In that Senate Committee of the Whole, Madam President, colleagues on this side and from our non-governmental senators over there, they were very, very adamant in asking the question, what was the rush? And what are we getting? Are we being pressured into doing this? Was a famous question in that meeting. And rather, Madam President, rather than the government being upfront and clear and honest and transparent and say to us that yes, there is some pressure coming from the United States, which we all know is much more powerful than our tiny nation, and in fact the entire set of countries in our region, whether it be Central America or CARICOM or them in combination. The United States is a powerful force to reckon with in this region of our country, of our world, sorry. One of their senators, Madam President, even said that he was a bit more candid, and I'm sure that he can be very candid today if he chooses to be one of the government senators to say, well, this is something we're doing for our friend. That is not, to me, the best explanation of things, but I could live with that. But don't tell us that the United States doesn't try or didn't try to get us to engage in this agreement as a way of pressuring us to do certain things. Don't tell me that. Because then why else would it be so secretive? And I'll tell you, Madam President, that even when we met with the Chargé d'Affaires, the answers to questions that we had were barely answered. I'd want to side with you completely with that, my colleague Senator Pitch. Not answered at all. In fact, what the Chargé d'Affaires said to us was, we ourselves on this side at that time, according to her, had not been finalized in terms of what the agreement would have been. They were still taking legal advice. All of this now, this is Thursday, I think, Wednesday or Thursday, I can't recall, Thursday. And on Monday, the agreement is being signed. While we sat here, in fact, in the chambers of this Honorable Senate. What could have been so secretive? The Chargé d'Affaires told us that, in fact, if we wanted to get some kind of idea as to what the agreement would be about, we could look to some other agreements. And she, I think, provided us with the agreement, a copy of the agreement that they did with Honduras, was it? Which gave us more questions than answers, in the same manner, Madam President, that when we finally saw the agreement that Belize signed on October 20th, gave us more questions than answers. And again, you know, sometimes you'd want to give the government the benefit of the doubt. You'd want to be able to say there is no clandestine purpose. You'd want to be able to say, oh, it's just a good gesture. Or we'd want to be able to support the arguments that my friend, the lead senator for government, waxed poetically just now about all the agreements we've signed before and how this is something good for humankind and taking in refugees. Well, why America not keep me? They have far more resources than us. They can take, that's the, and of course you'll argue Belize is the same, but we not got any kind of cheddar way America have. But that is the makeup of the American population, taking in refugees from all over. So it has to be, at least, we have to be at least a bit curious, a bit speculative, Madam Chair, Madam President, that the agenda here is to send personas non grata from the United States, or who are seeking to get into the United States, into Belize and other countries, because we know what, then they so only take them and do it as a favor for us. I'd prefer to think of it that way, because that's what my friend, the good senator from the government side said. It's no, they're not pressure, but you know, then he asked me as we're friends to take it on. One of the most glaring pieces, Madam President, of this agreement is that section that said, nothing set forth in this agreement shall be interpreted in such a way that commits the disbursement or allocation of funds by the parties. This has got to be the most alarming thing. So we will take these citizens of other countries who are seeking refuge. America is telling us, And if you listen to the government when they speak about this, they say, no man, we will have arrangements later on. I don't believe anything what the government say. So easily. We have to be convinced. And the Belizean people need to be convinced because they are tired of being lied to, especially by this administration. I listen as my friend, the lead opposition senator, again, celebrates 5 years today. 5 years of lies. 5 years of pulling the wool over the eyes of Belizeans. 5 years of they will say they anyway. Let's get back to what is here. No financial obligation, Madam President, on the part of the United States exists in this document. In fact, it tells you that, in fact, if the United States decides that it cannot, or it has some kind of impediment in its budget, and it sees that other things are more important, that they reserve the right to cut the funding, even if they agree to it. Well, they're not agreeing to it, number one. And number two, they're telling you, even if we give you the resources needed to take care of persons who come under this agreement, listen, we reserve the right to take it back. And we know very well the United States can give and take back. We saw that very clearly with the MCC compact. And we know that it can be politically driven. We saw this like night and day. And I told them, you know, Madam President, when they came here to trumpet the comeback of MCC, there is something that is going on behind closed doors. How all of a sudden that come back in, and there is speculation. There is speculation, and in the absence of information, speculation has got to be the thing that we have to worry about, because this, you know, Madam Speaker, there has been gross mishandling, for me to try to stay parliamentary-like. There's been gross mishandling of situations and agreements and arrangements. There is speculation, Madam President, that all that has happened with BL and all of this is all connected, you know. There's speculation that, in fact, we are signing this safe third country agreement because America is pressuring us to do so. There is speculation that, in fact, the Fortis and BEL shares will end up in the hands of a United States non-green, non-efficient, energy efficient.
So, Madam President, the lead opposition senator is engaging.
Madam President, my friend, the leader of government business, must have a standing order to
yes,
rise on.
You are imputing improper motives with you are imputing improper motive based on speculation. Certainly, Senator Faber, you must know that you ought not to abuse your parliamentary privilege and engage in this type of wild, speculative assertions.
Senator Faber, I ask that you therefore continue and kindly keep the conversation to the contents of the motion.
But it is related, Madam President, and I do reclaim whatever time my friend, the leader of opposition, of government business, wasted just now. As I've said, in the absence of information, this is not a government that gives information, Madam President. That is exactly why we are here debating this agreement after the fact that they don't sign it, you know. And I hear the whole rigmarole about the fact that that is the chronological order in which things ought to go and have gone for many years. But that did not stop the government. That did not prohibit the government from dealing with the opposition, dealing with the NGO community, and saying, listen, this is something we want to sign, can we discuss it? and then sign it and then make them debate it afterwards in the Senate if that is the case. But there was zero consultation on the part of the government to stakeholders. I don't know if the senators in the back row over there can say that they were given some insight into the agreement before the U.S. told you about it. From the government, I see from the shaking of heads, they absolutely did not. Senator Chanona is saying that it was when I sensitized her that the U.S. had come to us that she learned about it. So you have to pardon us, Madam President, when we say that things might be happening behind the scenes, because every day we see things happening behind the scenes. What is not speculation and what is not rumor is that in our meeting with the U.S., Chargé d'Affaires and her colleagues, we asked the question specifically because, again, it was rumored and we speculated, but we did not have any information because the government, again, failed to tell us the truth, failed to, when they came here to talk about the MCC being revived, they didn't tell us the details. What the U.S. told us is that, in fact, they made some amendments to the compact to allow for us to not be against renewable energy, which, as you know, was non-renewable energy, which, as you know, formed one of the basic tenets of the whole agreement. It was for education and for us to get energy sources that were not against the environment. Well, the U.S. told us that they asked that they don't preclude, they don't stop the government in this arrangement from engaging with those entities in the U.S. that don't care about the environment. That is not speculation, that is fact. Unless the Chargé didn't tell me correctly, or I misunderstood the Chargé, and if that is the case, I do so apologize to the lady profusely at this point. But I am almost certain that that is not the case. So they have made way, Madam President. They have made way for these large businesses, industries in the United States who don't care about our environment to now be able to come in and wheel and deal. And that is why I say that I bet you that the arrangement is for, while it may be under the guise of Belizean ownership and Belizean hands, this thing will end up under the control of some big business entity in the U.S. who don't care about our environment and will shut to the dirtiest canals in Belize the concerns of environmentalists like my friend Senator Chanona and her friends. All of us, you're right, you're right.
Madam President, on a point of order, I refer to...
What is your point of order? What standing order?
Please confine your points to the motion at hand, Senator.
It is the motion at hand.
It is not.
It is the motion at hand.
Senators,
if
a
you
point
need
of order has been raised. Senator Aguirre, you wish to raise your point of order?
Yes, Your Honor. And I'm referring to Standing Order number 36, which clearly says that members must confine their contributions to the bills, to the motions that are before the Senate at this particular time. Senator Farber continues repeatedly to be imputing improper motives, to be speaking about everything except for the motion that's before us at this moment, Madam President, and I ask that you kindly ask him to confine his remarks to the motion at hand.
Thank you, Senator Aguirre and Senator Farber. 2 points. One, certainly in discussing any bill or motion, I am prepared for context to be broad. However, I do believe that you must corral your thoughts to that of the motion in front of us.
Let me do it this way then, Madam President. I have said, and I will continue to say, there is, as is the case, I think that was the general consensus of my colleagues over there, except for the government senators who apparently got their tongue. They not got nothing to say about this in the committee of the whole. They had nothing to say, absolutely nothing to say. But I believe it was the consensus of my colleagues on the backbench over there that there was some pressure from the United States on this. And the points that I'm making, Madam President, explains why we believe that there is that kind of pressure. So it is absolutely related. Absolutely related. It is all connected. So this is one of the things that Belize has got to do, because the United States doesn't take lightly to us saying no. More particularly, Mr. Trump, the president over there, and we've seen many instances of this where, listen, you have to comply to what the big United States is asking you to do. So there is that kind of pressure. But my original point that took me there is that there was no financial obligation specified in this agreement at all on the part of the United States, and no level of comfort, Madam President, that the government offers, that the Attorney General offered to us in committee, can tell me that they will foot the bill for these people who they've brought. I asked the question several times in that session at the Central Bank for a committee meeting, Madam President. What is in it for Belize? What are we getting? How are we benefiting? And I hear again the usual rhetoric. Oh, this is good for humanity. We are taking in people who are seeking refuge from other countries. It is absolute nonsense, Madam President. We have had refugees come to this country, hand over fist. And in fact, they coexist among us now. And when you look at the melting pot that has become our country, no matter if you're a refugee or not, the fact of the matter is something which blew me off my chair practically, literally speaking, or figuratively speaking, I should say, at the Central Bank, was when my friend, the Attorney General, said that he believes that the government adequately takes care of the citizenry of this country in terms of housing, health, education, all of those things. Well, the Belizean people, Madam President, have a completely different view. So they tell us it's going to be 10, not more than 10 people per year. Not in the agreement. Not in the agreement. And they want us to believe that this is what is going to happen. 10 persons per year. They give us very little, if any, information at all. And then they say that they're going to be able to vet these people as well for criminal activity and anything else negative that they might bring to our country. In fact, in discussion, they tell you that these people who are going to come here are going to be actually good, skilled people looking for a nice place to live. But if that is the case, why doesn't the U.S. want them? The reason is, Madam Speaker, there is concerns that the U.S. has and that we should equally be concerned about. And then we ask the question of how is it that we're going to check these people? And the lead senator, who is absent today, said, oh, well, we have the ability through our Central American and or CARICOM organizations to do the kind of background check on these people. Telling you, I'm not even sure we have the capability of checking our own citizens' background here. But at that meeting, the Attorney General scoffed at that, and so maybe he has something to say about that. Then he says, Madam President, that we are going to change the legislation and create legislation after the fact. It's, again, not the matter, the immediate matter at hand, but it is very similar to what has happened with their signing on to the full freedom of movement and labor in CARICOM. Other countries are making legislation changes. Belize started it on August 1st, and the legislation not come yet. In Barbados, the immigration legislation is being, they quarrel about that for months before the actual August 1st, but we no bother take precautions, and it's going to be the same thing here. They are telling us now they want the Senate to pass this into law, and then after the fact, they're going to deal with the legislation. So those things, Madam President, have us very, very concerned. The Briceño administration, in our view, Madam President, is compromising Belize's dignity and our independence in exchange for, let me put it the way my friend the senator put it over there, for a diplomatic favor, a diplomatic friendliness. We, Madam President, ask that we abandon this agreement, or at very least, that the government comes clean, telling us the details. Let's get the details. Go and work out whatever agreements you feel need to be fleshed out here in front of this, on this Senate floor or in our committee rooms. Go out and do whatever consultations you need to do with the citizenry of this country, and then you bring this back, because as you've said, it cannot be enacted until the Senate passes it. Well, we are in, what is the rush? What is the rush? You tell me what's the rush if the U.S. not to try pressure you to do it. In fact, it is so important that while they couldn't get it in on October 20th, that they had to have a special meeting for us to, in fact, right afterwards, they sent it out. Without much information, just the bareback agreement, but what is the rush? Why can't you come up with what arrangement? You don't sign the agreement. Let us at least see what is the flesh of what you're agreeing to. By the way, we asked the U.S. government, Madam President, if there was some example of what was the execution agreements, basically, in other countries that first signed on to the agreement. And they said that none of the countries were that far along. Or at least that's what they told us.
No implementation framework.
So why is the rush then? All right, you already signed the agreement. You already pretty much told the United, did whatever favors you were to do to progress with the other things that we are going to get, because no matter what you tell us, we're getting something. In fact, you saw, again, where the MCC compact come back on the table. An agenda is being served for us and for them. And this, Madam President, I'll close with this. This agreement causes us to be very concerned about other happenings between Belize and the United States, or between the region and the United States. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't hear and again, before my friend Senator Guerra jumps up and talks about relevance, I am talking about the pressure that the great United States has on our small countries, which it seems to me is very evidently displayed here in this agreement that we're asked to support today. And we don't have any other chance to deal with these things. So they're sending warships in our waters in this region, Madam President. Did Belize make a statement? Did the foreign minister say something officially about that kind of thing? You are completely correct. They brought the agreements, talking about the agreements that came to the Senate. That was one that was docile for decades or years at least. And they brought that for us to approve that no, none of these superpowers can come and operate in our waters, then bam! I'm talking about
Madam,
the agreements that we sign here in the Senate, like this one that we're signing today. I wouldn't get up if I were you.
Madam President,
Senator Guerra?
I again get up on the same point of order. It concerns me when we stand up in the Senate to grandstand on matters that have no relevance to the motion that is before us. None.
Senator Faber, you may proceed.
Madam President, maybe the senator can tell me if it is not that we are dealing with agreements, bilateral or multilateral agreements that come to this honorable house for ratification, treaties. That's what we're talking about. How can you say that what I'm saying is not relevant unless you're slow?
No, I have the
Leader of Government.
I have the standing order for that. Shall be out of order, standing order 36-4. Shall be out of order to use offensive or insulting language among members. Madam Chair, I've raised it and I leave it to you for you to decide.
Senator Patrick Faber, kindly use language that may not be offensive or insulting to another member of the Senate. Maybe for you it may not be, but perhaps for them it may. So I ask that we avoid doing that.
Madam President, you're asking me to... Exactly, and I can't, if he takes offense to something that is not directed towards him, then it can only apply to him if what I'm saying is true to him. And that is his call, not mine. But I'm guided by your caution. Let me say this, Madam President. This agreement may not be a bad thing altogether, and I don't want that to be what is taken away. As we've said to the United States, who we protest, we support, we vehemently state is our ally and our friend. In fact, that is why I fully endorse what my friend, the senator from the other side, suggested should have been done in order to handle this matter. The way he put it, that like if your friend can ask you to stand side of you on something to help do something, you are more inclined to help your friend because he's your friend and you work together on other issues together. But that's not what the government has come to do. And so it leads us to believe that there is some pressure. And the devil, as you know, Madam President, is in the details. And so we have to be concerned. If they give us less reasons to speculate, it would be better, you know. And we said this to the United States, but you know what is true, Madam President? It is not the duty of the United States to share with this National Assembly what the details are. In fact, we said that to the Charge d'Affaires. It is not your duty to tell us what is in the agreement. It is the duty of those who sign on the behalf of the Belizean people, or who negotiate, or who engage on the behalf of the Belizean people, and they have failed miserably. Then they complain when Belizeans speculate or run away with the wrong idea according to them. Well, Madam President, we on this side say we cannot support this agreement. We cannot support it not because of what it seeks to do genuinely in some ways, but rather because of the clandestine nature in which the government continues to act with this and other activities that it is engaged in. So until we see those details, until we see what the fine print is, until we see how many people are really coming, what is it that the U.S. is going to give us to help to take care of these people who we take in? Because we don't have the resources until the Attorney General and the other members of the cabinet own up to the fact that they have failed, even after 5 years of the PUP, Madam President, to govern this country and to set things well. They don't know the reality out there, but people are suffering. They can't access education. They can't access health care. They can't access housing. None of these things are as easily accessible as they claim it is. People are struggling, and if you add one more person, whether the 1, whether the 10, whether the, as I made the case in our committee meeting, one more person adds a burden to a system that is already very, 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 very weak. So until we see those details and we understand what is in it for Belize, we are unable to support this agreement. I thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Hector Guerra.
Madam President, members of this chamber, to the Belizean public, good morning. Madam President, before getting into my comments on this motion, I'd like to join with the leader of government business and with Senator Farber in congratulating Bishop Wright on what is a major milestone. I'd also want to wish Belizeans and thank our veterans on this Remembrance Day. We take for granted a lot of the liberties that we today enjoy, and I think it is poignant, it is right that today we recognize that standing here in this chamber today, debating ardently, is really a privilege that we have because of what has been done before us. And one more point, Madam President, before getting into my points and my contribution, I'd like to wish my beautiful mother a very happy birthday. She continues to age gracefully, and I'm very grateful to have her in my life. Madam President, I'd like to start by saying that what this motion, what this agreement that we're being asked to approve today is really about compassion. It is about a recognition that as a country, we stand for human rights. We stand as a country that abides by what's called the rule of law. We recognize that in this global age, there are persons across our region that need protection, and Belize has time and time again in the past stepped up to the plate when it has been called upon. I give by way of example 2 communities which have contributed greatly to our economy. The first is the Mennonite community in Spanish Lookout, which came to Belize fleeing persecution and which have today contributed enormously to our agricultural sector, to our economy, to our ability as a country, Madam President, to be able to stand up on our 2 feet and to say that we are growing the food which we need. And so, Madam President, with that said, I'd like to get into what the nuts and bolts of this agreement are. This is an agreement that's seeking that Belize as a country accept persons who are facing political, religious, racial persecution that we as a country step up to the plate and say we are willing to accept you provided that you can meet what our law requires. We are willing to open the door to you if you are able to show that genuinely you need a place of safety, you need a place of refuge. This is what this agreement is about. It is an agreement that's being entered between Belize and the United States. And it's to take effect once the agreement is ratified, once it's incorporated into our laws, Madam President, number one. And number two, it comes into agreement when the parties finalize what is called an operational agreement. Broadly speaking, the way this will work, and it will be fleshed out in the operational agreement that's being worked upon, but the way it will work, Madam President, is that the U.S. may propose the transfer of applicants who have gone to the U.S. seeking safety to Belize. The U.S. will propose names. Belize, in its complete discretion, will then consider whether it is prepared to accept those applicants either entirely, partially, meaning only some, or Belize may decide that in that instance it's not prepared to accept any of the individuals which the U.S. is proposing. In considering these applicants, we will then look as a country into their skill set, into their background, and we've been told at the Committee of the Whole, which was held last week, that we as a country have the ability to look at the background of these individuals. We have relations with agencies in the Caribbean, agencies in Central America, to look into the criminal history of these individuals. And only those individuals who genuinely need protection will be allowed, will be granted the privilege of a refugee status within our country for the purpose of their safety. Another important point is that the applicants that we have said we're prepared to consider are applicants from the CARICOM countries, are applicants from Central America, excluding, importantly, Guatemalans. Another important proviso is that we will not accept Belizeans who have gone to the U.S. seeking refuge. We will not accept our own people, Madam President. And that's because there's an underlying principle that's behind this. And you know, this is nothing new, Belizean people. There is a convention called the Convention on Status of Refugees. It was entered back in the 1950s in Geneva by multiple countries, including Belize, which ratified it back in 1990, if I'm not mistaken. And the idea is that when someone is seeking refuge, you don't send that person back to the country where that person could possibly lose his life, her life, could be at risk of harm. We as a world, as a globalized world, as a world which recognizes the essential part that human rights plays recognize that each country must play its part. Madam President, there are various issues which Senator Faber has risen. The first, lack of transparency, consultation. There are 2 points that I'd want to raise for the benefit of the Belizean people. The first is that last week we had the benefit of what's called a committee of the whole. It means that members of this Senate, all members, were invited for a sit-down with the Attorney General himself, along with Ambassador Borland, who explained to us the essence of the agreement that's before the Senate today, so that a lot of the points were brought out at that meeting, and there was a healthy, hearty debate in terms of the benefits and the cons of this agreement. So that's number one. Number two, we are before the Senate today debating the agreement for a reason. It is in debate that we bring across our various perspectives and that we assist the Belizean people in understanding what we're doing. And so when Senator Faber gets up and says, oh, there's no transparency, there's no consultation, let's get the details. Well, that is the reason why the agreement is before the Senate today, to in fact debate across these aisles what the agreement says, why it benefits our country, why in certain instances it may not. The second point I want to raise, or I want to answer, Senator Faber asked, what is the pressure? I've adverted to it already. We are a country that follows, that prescribes to the principles of international law. We've signed on to certain refugee conventions which requires us to play our part on the global stage. So when one asks what the pressure is, it is that we as a country in the past sought it right to sign on to certain agreements which said we would be prepared to accept refugees provided that they're genuine, provided that there's a real risk that these individuals face of political, racial persecution. This agreement, I repeat, is about compassion. Senator Faber made much ado about nothing when he said, oh, it's extraordinary, which other countries have been doing this. You know, it's something that I considered. And last night, while preparing for today's debate, I did some research into countries who have similar arrangements. And I came about the following countries from an article in Al Jazeera: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico, Panama, Guatemala, Honduras. And so when Senator Faber gets up and says it's extraordinary, one must look to see what's happening across this region. And it is clear that countries across this region have found it important to play their part in what we today are doing. Senator Faber raised issues about the availability of funds, about our technical capacity as a country. You know, it's a strange thing because any read of this article will make it plain that the United States, that the implementation of this agreement, and I quote, and I'm reading from the agreement, is subject to the availability of funds. I'm reading from the agreement, Madam President, and technical capacity of, and I underscore, each party. Each party, Senator Farber. So when one gets up and says, oh, we have an issue about funds, how can we be accepting any more applicants for refugee status when I understand there might be issues about how we'll be able to afford it, but the agreement contemplates that it's subject to our resources as a country. It is saying that we as a country can request if we need resources from the United States of America. Madam President, there was an issue about vetting these people, these applicants, and I've already addressed that. There is currently, Madam President, what's called a Refugee Eligibility Committee that's formed under the Refugee Act. And I know Senator Wade deals with these persons frequently. But the point that I want to make is that there is already a committee in place that vets, that looks at these applications, so that it's not something new that has to be put in place. Number two, Senator Farber asked, well, what the rush? What's the rush? Why is it that we're pushing this through? But again, I go back to the words in the agreement because it's provided to us to read, to understand. Unless you're slow, Senator Farber.
Kindly refrain from that kind of language at each other.
Unless you're slow. Article 6, paragraph 4. The plain language of the agreement. The parties intend for the operating procedure to contain gradual steps. Gradual, and address, among other things, procedures necessary to effectuate the transfer of individuals under this agreement and institutional capacity requirements. What does that mean, Madam President? We will not accept individuals if we do not have the resources in place. The agreement gives us that discretion. So when one gets up today to ask what the rush is, I ask that we read, analyze, understand the agreement, Senator Farber, before we get up today and grandstand, man. And so, Madam President, the last point I'd want to address is what happens if we do not accept these individuals. Might be a question that we have in mind and that the Belizean people might want to know. The simple answer is that we then address them under immigration laws. Our immigration laws already address that when there are individuals who we are not accepting into our country, those individuals, arrangements are put in place to get them to a place where they then decide they want to go, Madam President. That is the simple answer. And so that what I'm trying to bring across is that as much as you hear that the heavens are falling down, that we're ceding our sovereignty as a country, in fact, this agreement is an exercise of our sovereignty. It reserves our right to accept, to reject, to even terminate the agreement at any time, suspend at any time, if we believe that we do not, at a particular point in time, have the capacity to deal with these individuals. And so I'd really just want to end by saying that this agreement, contrary to what the opposition and Senator Farber wants the Belizean people to believe is not about Belize becoming a dumping ground. It's not about Belize ceding sovereignty. It's about control, compassion, a recognition of human rights. And so when I look at this agreement, I listen to the concerns, and when I do my own research, I'm telling the Belizean people that this is something that I, as an individual, can say I support. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Glenfield Dennison.
Obliged, Madam President. Madam President, today's debate reminds me of a quote, and I have to remind myself of it very often. Not every person in their own mind is fighting for what they think is right. And everyone thinks that they are on the side of good, Madam President. Why is that relevant to this motion that we're debating? Because I love that the discourse in this House, in this Senate, allows for differing perspectives to be shared respectfully. Because, Madam President, we are bound by our duty to the Belizean people to seek the truth always. Because you see, Madam President, the further our society drifts from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. So let me attempt to speak some truths. Belize recognizes human rights. We don't need any agreement. We don't need any reassurance that this country is rooted on principles which acknowledge the supremacy of God. None of my words, Madam President. We acknowledge the supremacy of God, faith in human rights and fundamental freedoms, the position of the family in a society of free men and free institutions, the dignity of the human person, and the equal and inalienable rights with which all members of the human family are endowed by their Creator. I don't think anyone in this honorable House will see that as not the truth. If you do, please submit your passport to the immigration office. You don't belong in this country. Go and seek asylum somewhere else. On the topic of asylum seekers, Madam President, why do third safe countries exist? You see, the premise behind seeking asylum, Madam President, is that you are from a country in which you feel, whether rightly so or not, whether you feel that you are unsafe and that your rights will not be upheld. So you flee from that country to another country, and you seek the refuge of that other country so that you are not made to go back to your home country. Now, I hope I never have to seek asylum and flee from this country, but if I did, I will tell you this. It will not be as an economic citizen. I will flee only for fear of persecution in my home country. And this agreement is about people who are fleeing not because of fear of political persecution, but those who are fleeing and trying to seek better opportunities. That is the mischief that we are here deliberating, Madam President. There is a feeling by the United States of America, who has sold the dream so well, the American dream, that people are not fleeing their country, but are seeking to better themselves in that country under the guise of needing asylum. So the mischief that I see is that it is those people, and it is in an attempt to temper the amount of those people who seek to go to the US, to say, hey, we're going to reach out. We got some other countries where we are saying you go wait. You're not waiting in our country and stay here on status seeking asylum. You can't send you back to your country. So here we go on. If you're really in fear for your life, you don't have to stay at States. Go to Belize. They will process your application and they will test to see if you are really in fear and meet the criteria to not have to be sent back to your country. It is a tool. Madam President, it is a tool in the arsenal of the great United States that will be used to say to would-be people who would come to the States under the guise of asylum seeking, to say, no, stop abusing our system and staying here, go to Belize. Now, unfortunately, Madam President, the other end of that tool, the other side of that coin, is that there are genuinely people who are seeking asylum, who are caught up in the system that is being abused by those who don't really need asylum, and those people genuinely do need to seek asylum and need a system that could help to facilitate their expedited processing of that asylum status. So, unfortunately, for those genuine people, people are abusing the system. And so the question is, how do we balance assisting those people who need to be able to seek asylum with not being used in the way I mentioned earlier? And I came up with this. You could cross from Toledo, you could cross from Guatemala through Halacte, you could cross from Union, you could cross anywhere you want on a come straight here. Come straight here, go to Immigration, Refugee Department, apply for no asylum status, and we are dealing to no because we love dealing with refugees. We deal with them in one of the largest numbers for any country there is. But you see, Madam President, when you go to States, that means you never want to believe. And if you want reach states and then they send you to Belize. I know that Belize have the capacity to keep you here, so you're going to find your way right back. So, I want to be clear. Nobody can gaslight me into thinking that supporting or withholding my support for this agreement is saying whether or not I want to uphold the rule of law. Nobody can gaslight me or bring any invalid argument to me that whether or not I support this agreement or don't support this agreement is a reflection of my position on human rights. Nobody will make me believe that this is a simple arm's length transaction between two friends. Because inherent in a request by a friend to do something is the ability to say no, thank you. And with friendship, continue and go along, because that was not the basis of our friendship. I'm not afraid to cut off friends, you know. Because friendship must be mutually beneficial. And to the point where it's toxic to one member more than the other, you must be able to say no thank you and move on with your life. So, yes, we are a country that abides by all of our international law obligations in relation to refugees and in relation to the Convention Against Torture and Treatment against inhuman and degrading penalties. So, I want to know, I don't want to know nothing. The people of Belize want to know what we really signed this agreement for. And in the absence of the information, you will speculate, leader for government business, that this is the MCC money. You will guess and come up with your own answers as to why. I will commend you, leader for government business today. This is the first time in my time in the Senate such an extensive explanation has been offered when any motion has been put to this House. I thought it was very impressive that the time was taken to give us a explain. Those things are usually left for closing remarks. Usually just this is the motion we deal with. Sometimes when you read all the recitals, let's go. We're going through with this one. I think it's because we sent some resistance for this one. And I don't think the resistance is wrongly placed. I think it's proportionate to the questions that are had in relation to this. And so I join by saying I never take too kindly that I find out from this from the Americans. But be that as it may, there are some things that are out of our control, and there are some things that we are proposing to do that are within our control. And so we can ask what the Americans will do for us for this agreement. But what we can ask is what Belize plans to do in relation to some of the things it proposes it will do. Like Article 5(2), the government of Belize shall determine a procedure consistent with its relevant obligations to resolve the status of any of those who may abandon pending claims or fail to seek protection. Belize, as one of the parties, will seek to develop operating procedures. This is Article 6(1). Will seek to develop operating procedures to assist with the implementation of this agreement. We could know what that looked like. We can start to have a discussion about what those things are, what's wrong with our current refugee act, what is wrong with the procedures that we just use for how many thousand refugees, Senator? 12,000 refugees. What in that procedure needs to be tweaked to make it better, not for this agreement, but for everybody coming in through both tests and so. What do you want me down south, Senator Rana? Halakte. 4 people coming in. How we could strengthen those? We have to wait till the America we sign an agreement for assess that. We can assess it now because my friend in front of me is right. This country has benefited greatly from people who have come here seeking protection. I just got a Spanish lookout and you see, I like a different country they use for their tax money good. Got a Blue Creek. Least potholes I've seen ever. I can come back on topic. Yeah. So, it started raining yesterday, so that's why I pothole up on my mind. I really want to ask the members of this House to remember, while we're discussing the rights of, is it correct to call them aliens? Undocumented, yes. Those who would come seeking asylum, I can stick to that. I think we'll use that word again. I want us, while we're discussing their rights and freedoms, to remember that liberty, real freedom, must, for us in Belize, include the ability to tell people what they do not want to hear. And we know the jump up here, and that the guys are standing out because things are uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable conversation to have, but we must have it. Turn, because I like repeat myself. So, make we know what this agreement can look like for Belize. Make we know more about America. There are things in here that we think we will do, we can do, we should do, as a good citizen of the world, and we can discuss those things. we can set out a protocol for if there are asylum seekers in other countries who would want to come to Belize. Make we hear what the foreign ministry thinks is a proper procedure for bringing those people. Make we hear what types of skills we are looking for from people who would be asylum seekers. Because I get frightened when you talk about skills, you know. Kind of know that. Understand criminal record, you know. And I really follow criminal record, because if you're unsafe in your country, you're unsafe in your country, whether you got a criminal record or not. They never put on charge for you that you be? No, true? They might put... Okay. So, we have to discuss, they might put one for me soon. We have to discuss that policy, you know. Make we hear, like, what kind of criminal record we talk about? Because now political persecution, criminal record, then man, by all means, that shouldn't disqualify the person. The person is in danger in the country. Ghana almost try to extradite the leader of the opposition, you know. Belize got it all right. Man win more seats than the two former oppositions combined together.
Senator, keep today.
That's asylum, Madam President. We're on topic. That was extradition to the United States, Madam President. We're right on topic. Madam President, no fear, Madam President. If that is your fear, do not worry about that, Madam President. I guarantee you.
I have no fear. My job is simply to ensure that each of you get an opportunity to speak on the motion or bill in front of us.
Okay, Madam President, but since we're up on it, that time is the one that when we talk about rule of law, I will be honest. Only my thoughts, Madam President, and I'll say the words. But when we spoke about the free movement of people who are in fear of persecution, Madam President, I don't think we needed to look all the way to the great United States. That's all I will say about that. Lest I be accused of loving pedophiles. Which I do not. But, Madam President, I want to wrap up like this. Supporting or not supporting this bill is not a statement on your human rights position. In fact, I can make the argument that the need to expedite the processing of people in the first safe country that they arrive is a stronger argument for supporting human rights than sending them to a third safe country. That is the obligation on the state which they arrive at. Supporting or not supporting this bill is not a recognition or statement of the senator on their position of rule of law. Nobody in this honorable chamber can question my position as it relates to rule of law and where I stand with that. So fear-mongering and saying that if you don't support this bilateral agreement or inferring that if you don't support it, you don't support rule of law, that's an invalid argument. Let's not go there, right? Belize has a stellar position on the world stage as it relates to the treatment of people who come to this country seeking asylum. The very fact that we have a committee that is independent, that is made up of different technocrats to vet refugee applications is a testament to our commitment to processing people who would come into this country needing refuge. We don't need this as a notch in our belt, for sure that what our position is on helping asylum seekers. We don't need this. We good. We could stand on our reputation for that. And the last point, Madam President, is this. I know I'm more here for 45 minutes, but last point is this. I like when people level at me, Madam President. Me, I prefer that. Tell me the God's honest truth and hurt me, that make I feel good it and lie. So if we have to do this, tell me we have to do this. Tell me we not got a choice. Tell me there will be repercussions great and hellfire will come down on us as a country from the north if we don't pass this. Tell me that. Then make I decide if that is the position I wish to take. But not bottom me up. Do not tell me like Grandmaster, then I got no pressure upon this. I yield, Madam President.
Do I ask the leader of government business to wrap up? Well, nobody was standing, that's why I asked. Okay, so I recognize Senator Linsford Castillo, and before you speak, Senator Castillo, I just wish to inform you that Senator Patrick Farber has requested permission to make a statement at 11 o'clock on the observance of Remembrance Day. I have agreed to this request. So at 10:59, I will just pause to allow Senator Farber to make that statement, and then we will resume thereafter. Kindly proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, if you allow me to join my voice with my colleagues in first congratulating the Most Reverend Philip Wright on his ascension to now Archbishop of the Caribbean. Is that province of the West Indies? Yes, His Grace, that is his new title. So I want to extend my heartfelt congratulations to His Grace. And of course, too, I would want to join in today, November 11, paying tribute to those that have gone before us and who today we remember with the wearing of the poppy. And we want to pay a special tribute to them today as we remember them. And of course, as Madam President said, Senator Farber will be making some remarks in a few minutes. And so I would also want to join in paying tribute to those that gave their service and in some cases their lives for freedom and for us to enjoy the democracy that we live in today. And of course, thirdly, I would like to join the leader in government business in congratulating today my party and my government on this, the 5th year, 5 years since on November 11th, 2020, when we formed government. And of course, we have been working very hard and very tirelessly on behalf of this country and its people, even when we inherited 13 years of neglect, of maladministration by the UDP. We have been able to navigate, and we're still in the process of navigating our way to a better living, to a promising future for the people of this country. So I want to once again congratulate the People's United Party government. Now, Madam Speaker, I of course rise today in very, very strong support of this resolution before this Honorable Senate, authorizing the ratification by Belize of the agreement between the government of Belize and the government of the United States for cooperation regarding the examination of protection requests. Madam President, I also want to ask your permission to refer to my notes as I go along. But I want to ask this question, Madam President, and especially after listening to Senator Faber for several painful minutes, pontificating, because that is how I see it. But I asked the question, and after listening to him, I still wait to hear what is wrong or what is bad about this motion. I hear everything else from him except what is bad about the bill or what is wrong with this agreement, Madam President. Still, after all the verbiage can't say one single thing we're wrong or we're bad about the bill or about the agreement. Like, it reminds me, Madam President, you know, for some of us, you know, like when your significant other quarrel with you, they reel up with you, but then they still can't tell you what you do wrong or what is the problem, why they reel up with you. They just vex at you. That is how Senator Faber remind me when I listen to him going on and on and on about this agreement, Madam President. And so, Madam President, he mentioned earlier that in the committee of the whole Senate that we on the government side, it may seem like cat got our tongues when we sat and we listened. But the point is, the opportunity was given in the committee of the whole Senate for all senators to air their concerns, to ask questions, and to get any clarity with respect to this agreement, Madam President. And of course, as he mentioned, we had the Attorney General there, along with Ambassador Borland, who were prepared to address any concerns. And so, to come here today stating, and this was his words, he's no clearer on what the agreement brings, even after the committee of the whole Senate. Unbelievable. Can't understand that, senators. So, Madam President, this agreement, in only necessary, it is timely. And Senator Denison mentioned that Belize, the country of human rights. And so it is on that premise, Madam President, that this agreement represents one responsible, a balanced, and a humane approach to the growing regional challenge of migration and asylum management, Madam President.
I will ask if you could pause, Senator Castillo, and we give Senator Barber the opportunity at 11 o'clock to make a statement on the observance of Remembrance Day.
Madam President and honorable colleagues in the Senate, at this 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, we pause as nations of the Commonwealth and friends around the world do to remember those who fought and fell in the great wars and in conflicts since. Men and women who gave their lives so that freedom and peace might prevail across the earth. We especially remember those from British Honduras, as Belize was then known, who answered the call to serve during the First and the Second World Wars under the Commonwealth banner. Ordinary men who journeyed far from home to stand shoulder to shoulder with others in defense of liberty and human dignity. We honor too the continuing service and sacrifice of our own, the members of the the Belize Volunteer Guard and the Belize Defense Force, the Belize Police Department, the Coast Guard, the Fire Service, and all uniformed organizations who have died in the line of duty at home or abroad. We pay tribute to the Belize Ex-Services League, whose tireless work ensures that our veterans' contributions are remembered and that the debt of gratitude owed to them is never forgotten. Their courage and devotion to duty remain a shining light in our nation's history and a lasting reminder that peace must always be protected by the resolve of those willing to serve. As the poet wrote, Madam President, at the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. I now invite all honorable senators to stand for a moment of silence in remembrance of all who served and all who fell from British Honduras, Belize, and across the Commonwealth. Lest we forget. Thank you.
Senator Castillo, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I grew up in the 1980s. And I could remember in the 80s, Central American civil conflicts, and more recently, humanitarian crises. Belize, as a small nation, Madam President, has consistently opened its doors to persons fleeing persecution and violence. But we must recognize that from the 80s to now, that in today's world, the whole issue of migration from back then and even before then has evolved, Madam President. The increasing flow of people, Madam President, driven by political instability, economic hardships, climate impacts, crime, has placed new pressures on countries like Belize and other small states. And so in recent years, Madam President, Belize has seen a significant rise in irregular migration and asylum applications, particularly from our Central American and Caribbean neighbors. So I heard Senator Denison stated earlier that God forbid he would only leave Belize under what? Political persecution? Shooting? Okay. So that would be your reason.
And can we
Okay,
refrain
sorry, yeah.
from the back and forth
But-
between senators and focus
No.
on the bill, the motion?
It's all right, Madam President. My point is that to each his own. Everyone has his or her reason to seek migration or asylum in so many cases. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. Madam President, the United States, of which we are signing this agreement with, faces its own complex migration issues and challenges. We all have been seeing the movement of people northwards. And this issue, we tend to confine it only as a U.S. border issue. But it is, in my mind, Madam President, bigger than that. It is a regional issue. And one that demands shared responsibility, coordination and cooperation, Madam President. Emphasis on the word shared. This agreement, therefore, Madam President, fits squarely within the framework of shared responsibility, ensuring that both Belize and the United States work hand in hand to ensure the fair, efficient, and humane processing of protection requests while respecting our sovereignty, our laws, and international human rights standard. Very important, Senator Denison, and I think you're a member of the Human Rights Association, I think. You're not? Okay. Madam President, the core intent of this agreement is straightforward. No isms and schisms, no blurriness or nothing to hide or being sinister or secretive. It established a cooperative mechanism between Belize and the United States for the examination of protection requests, Madam President. This mechanism allows for information sharing, capacity building, and technical assistance in asylum processing. Importantly though, Madam President, I want to emphasize, this agreement is not a blanket acceptance of migrants from the United States. It is not a burden shifting arrangement on your problems. I'm going to hand it to you. Instead, Madam President, it's a structured framework which ensures that any cooperation on protection requests is done voluntarily transparently and with Belize's full consent. No gun no get put no over the head. Case by case. And within our national capacity. So, Senator Faber asked the question earlier, what is in it for Belize? So that you may ask, Senator, what is in it for Belize? Okay. Madam President, this policy was not, or this agreement was not done in isolation, or just out of the blues, or just last minute, as some would tend to want to put it. Madam President, it forms a part of Belize's broader engagement within the regional framework for migration and protection, supported by organizations such as the IOM, International Organization for Migration, organizations such as the UNHCR, United Nations High Commission for Refugees, and the RCM, which is the Regional Conference on Migration. How can we not work along with such a request, which is now an agreement, when we are signatories to these very important organizations which has been doing work in this country over a long period of time? How can we now say, oh, you know what, we don't depend on that? We can't, Madam President. So, by entering into this agreement, Madam President, Belize positions itself as a responsible regional partner, one that is proactive, one that participates in solutions rather than problems. Furthermore, Madam President, this partnership opens opportunities for greater technical and financial assistance to Belize, and I think that goes without saying. Assistance in strengthening our asylum system, border infrastructure, which is very close to my heart, and national security apparatus, Madam President, all of which contribute to the safety and well-being of Belizeans. That is what is in it for Belize, Senator Faber. Madam President, we must also view this cooperation as part of our moral duty. Earlier, Senator Guerra referred to or used the word compassion. We are compassionate people. We have moral obligations. We are Christians. And our Christian values and our Constitution, Madam President, call upon us to respect the dignity of every human being by ensuring that protection requests are examined fairly, humanely, and above board. Madam President, for the public to have questions or even apprehensions about this agreement is quite okay. But I want to be very, very clear, Madam President, what this policy or this agreement is not. And by that we'll address what it is. But for one, Madam President, this agreement is not an open door policy. Nope. It does not mean that Belize will become a large-scale host country for migration, for migrants relocating from elsewhere. Because that was one of the first things I heard mentioned when this agreement became public. Right away, people think that, oh, plane load after plane load on the land, the airport, and people just will be shuttled away into the country. Absolutely not. Madam President, as the Attorney General and Leader of Government Business mentioned, there are only 10 persons per year. 10, my goodness. And I know that blow the air out of some of the skeptics because they don't really run with the narrative. That, yeah, yeah. Trailer load, plane load. I want to make it clear to the public it is absolutely not so. Rather, Madam President, it is a framework for cooperation, a tool that allows Belize to participate in orderly, managed, and a transparent process with full respect for our capacity and our sovereignty. That is what this agreement is about. In fact, Madam President, by having such an agreement in place, Belize will be better positioned to control and manage migration flows, reducing thus the risk of irregular crossing, trafficking, exploitation, etc., etc. Above board. So, Madam President, in wrapping up, in a world increasingly marked by displacement, uncertainty, humanitarian need, this agreement reflects the kind of responsible, principled diplomacy that Belize stands for. And I could end there and make my point with that. It is an affirmation that small nations too can play a meaningful role in addressing global challenges. By ratifying this agreement, Madam President, Belize sends a clear signal that we are prepared to be a part of the solution, that we will uphold human dignity and protecting our national interest, and that we will continue to act as a reliable and respected partner on the international stage. I therefore, Madam President, commend this motion to the Honorable Senate and urge the full support of my colleagues. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Kevin Pereira.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'd like to join my colleagues in congratulating Archbishop Wright on his ascension as Archbishop of the District of the West Indies, and so I think that it's certainly a proud moment for Belize. This being its first, as Senator Faber had mentioned just a while ago. Madam President, I'd like to start out by stating that there's a major difference between briefing and consultations, and I think that if there's one major confusion we have in Belize, and has always had, and we've had this for a long, long time, it's our leaders continue to mix those two terms, or confuse those two terms. The meeting of the committee that was held at the Central Bank, to me was a briefing session. And it was a briefing session simply because an agreement was already signed. Consultations means that you have a legitimate opportunity to give inputs, and those inputs can impact the final outcome or the final product. But when an agreement has been signed, obviously, those inputs cannot have any type of impact on a final product because the agreement was already signed. The second point I'd like to make, Madam President, before I really get into my written presentation, is that there's a reason why, and I believe that you were part of this process during the first constitutional reform process, Madam President, if my memory serves me right. But there's a reason why the Senate ratifies the agreement, and it is to provide a backdrop, some backstop, I should say, for when our leaders have to sign agreements under pressure, perhaps even under duress, that they have to come to the Senate, and the Senate must ratify those agreements, or they're not enforced. I'm hoping that we will always have this mechanism in place, Madam President, because the reality is that we're a relatively small country compared to many of the other countries in the world, and so there are times when our interests may be secondary to theirs, and that sometimes we may have our leaders may be negotiating with a gun on the table in front of them. And so it's important that we have this ratification process by the Senate. Madam President, the United States is our neighbor. It's a behemoth of a neighbor at that. This is a neighbor that has cast a long shadow over the Western Hemisphere and the world. When we look at what large and powerful countries like Canada, Mexico, China, even China, have had to go through to secure their trading relationships with the United States, we understand the strategic strength and leverage this country has. For context, Madam President, the U.S. consumes around 25% of all the world produces, even though it only accounts for 4% of the world's population. It outspends the next 10 closest rivals combined in military spending. In fact, it outspends China by three times in military spending. I say all of this to say, Madam President, that the U.S. is an economic and military giant. Apart from China, there is no country in the world that comes close in comparison economically or militarily. Now, Madam President, we are being asked today to ratify an agreement under which migrants flee to the U.S. and will be transferred from the U.S. to Belize to request refugee status in Belize. We're a small nation with a long history of immigrants. Some would say that we proportionately have as big an immigration problem as the United States. I say we have one much bigger than the United States. You will note that in the 1980s and 90s, and even to present, Madam President, our demographics have changed dramatically because of immigrants. In fact, I understand that over 5,000 immigrants were recently given refugee status. this over 20,000 immigrants were given amnesty. I believe that was last year, Madam President. The 5,000 immigrants that were given refugee status, Madam President, represents 1.25% of our population. 1.25% of our population were given refugee status at the 5,000. If you include the 20,000 that were given amnesty, Madam President, that represents 5% of our population. If the U.S. were to take in 1.25% of its population as immigrants, it would have to take in around 3.75 million people. Comparison to if you were to compare Belize and the U.S. in terms of proportionately. If it took in 5% of its population, Madam President, they would have to take in 15 million immigrants. In 2024, the data shows, Madam President, that the U.S. took in around 3 to 4 million immigrants. Our amnesty program was 20,000 or 5%. Now, if you look at the projected estimates that the government had about those who would have been seeking amnesty, that figure was 40,000 persons. Apparently only 20,000 of them had applied for amnesty, Madam President, but 40,000 would have represented 10% of Belize's population. And 10% would represent 30 million persons, 30 million persons compared to the U.S. Population, Madam President. And so I say all of this to say, Madam President, that in my view, we have a much larger immigration problem and challenge than the United States. And so it behooves me, it baffles me, in fact, why this agreement was not reciprocal. Because we also need help. But like how the United States used to be, we have welcomed those who sought Belize for a better life. We don't have a Statue of Liberty welcoming the immigrants from the Sapodilla Keys, Madam President, but we do have the majestic mahogany tree offering its shade to the weary travelers from the elements, as well as the warm welcome from this country's friendly people. Even though this scenario, Madam President, even given this scenario, Madam President, we are willing to assist under the spirit of cooperation. There are many who would say our problem is so large we cannot extend a helping hand. But given that it's only 10 persons per year, it's limited to 10 persons per year, Madam President, perhaps under the spirit of cooperation and equal respect, perhaps we could lend a hand this time. But the point must be made, Madam President, that we have a bigger challenge than the United States with respect to immigration. Madam President, when we look at the Safe Third Country Agreement proposed by the United States, we don't just see a policy document, we see a pattern. A pattern that stretches back over a century. A pattern of powerful nations disregarding our circumstances to further their interests. This agreement, in my view, is being done under the long shadow of the Monroe Doctrine. Madam President, let us be clear. This agreement, under the guise of shared responsibility, feels like a modern application of the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, Madam President, for those who forgot their history, essentially told the world that the Americas are the United States' sphere of influence. It created a world where Latin America and the Caribbean nations, including us, are treated less as sovereign partners and more as satellite states on the periphery of an empire. When we look at the situation down in Colombia and Venezuela, we understand clearly that this policy is relevant today as it was when President Monroe declared it. When we are pressured to become a logistical backwater for their immigration challenges, even though we have a comparable challenge or a larger challenge, that pressure echoes the old assumption that our security and social welfare are secondary. We are not merely a convenient holding cell for the U.S. asylum system. We are a sovereign nation that needs to look after the best interests of its citizens first. It is for this reason, Madam President, that I believe issues as weighty as this one should have perhaps been put to a referendum. Let the people decide. I don't think, in fact, probably the greatest democracy in the world would not argue if we were to practice that democracy in its purest form, putting it out to the people to have people decide. Madam President, our concerns are also amplified by the recent highly visible military buildup in the wider Caribbean. We are told that this naval and air presence is about combating drug trafficking and organized crime. We certainly welcome genuine cooperation against these scourges. Who wants to have that type of activity passing through its territory? But we must speak out, Madam President, about extrajudicial executions and militarizing the peaceful Caribbean. We've always felt that this part of the region has not been militarized. Yes, we have gang issues. Yes, we have crime challenges. But we've never been a militarized region. And hopefully we can remain that way. We talk about having a gun on the table when we negotiate, Madam President. This type of, and let me use the former Prime Minister's words here, the optics of it really doesn't look good. Ultimately, Madam President,
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 10.8, I move that the proceedings on the order paper be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour opposed.
Honorable members, the question is that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour do oppose. All those in favor kindly say aye.
Aye.
Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
may I continue, Madam President?
They may continue, Senator Hare.
Madam President, this agreement, ultimately, this is a matter of national sovereignty and security. Our resources as a small developing nation, are already committed to securing our porous borders, fighting domestic crime, supporting our immigration challenges, and building a better future for our people. But there are security risks, Madam President. This agreement, even with promised security screenings, forces us to accept individuals without having the sophisticated resources within our intelligence services to properly vet these applicants for possible links to cartels, criminal connections, and other anti-state activities. In fact, I believe it was the President of the United States who said that the persons coming in are rapists, murderers, and the worst type of individuals possible. And so how can we then sign this agreement and saying, well, the ones who are being sent here will be good people? There's also, Madam President, a fiscal and social strain. Immigration challenges have placed and continue to place a strain on our educational and health resources. This will have to continue to be borne by the Belizean people, taxpayers. And so we have to bear the costs of our own huge immigration challenges, as well as this one, because it's very clear in the agreement, Madam President, that the United States has not committed any type of resources to this program. Madam President, there are some questions that came from the persons in the business community that I'd like to raise this morning. And perhaps the leader of government business can address these in his wrap-up. But one of those questions, Madam President, is what mechanisms will be in place to ensure transparency and public confidence that the number of transfers remain limited as indicated? I know that there are provisions for what do they call it? The operating procedures. Yes, there's but that has not been. We haven't seen that yet. That is apparently a work in progress, and so that is something that we have to accept blindly this morning, even as we're contemplating and debating the motion, Madam President. But I think that's a very significant and relevant question. Madam President, another question is, given the existing backlog in Belize's refugee system, do current staffing levels and infrastructure allow for additional cases from the United States without compromising the quality or timeliness of protection determinations? And then there's the issue of human rights, Madam President. What facilities and operational standards will be implemented to guarantee that any processing or accommodation centers comply fully with human rights norms and that the process avoids potential violations? And then there's the access to basic services. What provisions will guarantee that transferred applicants have access to housing, healthcare, education, and other essential services so as to prevent situations of destitution or social exclusion? Again, Madam President, I believe that these are very relevant questions. Like I had mentioned, and I think several of my colleagues have mentioned before me, that there are no specific resource commitments to this program under the agreement. Madam President, our leaders, when they sign this agreement, may have secured certain safeguards, a veto over transfers and a cap on transferees, but let's be honest. The very act of signing an agreement that outsources another country's humanitarian problem to us is a profound national accommodation. I think, Madam President, and I think my colleague earlier said that we always step up to the plate when these situations come up and we're asked. But Madam President, every year we have a brain drain in these countries where our educated young people go to other countries to seek opportunities. And it's my hope, Madam President, that the administration, the government, and all of us will step up to the plate and try to provide better and more opportunities for these young people so that they stay at home and keep their brain power at home and contribute to the development of this country. We've lost too many of our brightest minds over the last several decades, and hopefully we can all come together and create an environment conducive for those to stay and develop this country along with us. Madam President, we must insist that our dignity is non-negotiable. Our national interest is paramount. We will work with the United States as friends and equals, but we will never agree to be treated as a backyard or a buffer state. As the Prime Minister of Barbados recently said, Mayor Motley, we are friends of all and satellites of none. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Gabriel Setti.
Madam President, with your permission, may I please refer and read off my notes?
Anyway.
Thank you. Madam President, honorable senators, and fellow Belizeans watching at home, we meet today not to celebrate, in my opinion, diplomacy, but to dissect what I can only describe this as a diplomatic embarrassment, an agreement that somehow managed to get signed while we were in the Senate, stamped by the government, only now to find out it's finding its way in this honorable Senate to seek legitimacy. Like my colleague would say, the lead senator for government business, utter nonsense. And I must say, Madam President, if I were the one bringing such an agreement to this chamber, I'd be ashamed. I said it. Because this is not a treaty of cooperation. This so-called agreement for cooperation regarding the examination of protection requests means that the United States, one of the richest, the most powerful nations on earth, can send third country nationals to Belize, who's also considered a third world country. See the logic? Where we are expected to process their asylum claims. In simple terms, Madam President, the U.S. gets to clean its border statistics, while Belize gets the bill, while Belize gets the bureaucracy, and while Belize gets the burden. The question that has been asked time and time, even before coming to the Senate, what does Belize get in return? So far, we haven't heard nothing. And we take it as that. Nothing. Not even a commitment of funding. Nowhere to be found in this agreement. We turn to Article 7, Paragraph 4 of the agreement, which has been stated before. But I will say it again. Nothing set forth in this agreement shall be interpreted in such a way that commits the disbursement or allocation of funds by the parties. So, you had your opportunity, leader of government business. So, let's translate that for the Belizean people, because I know you guys like to confuse the masses, but I'm not here for that. The United States may or may not pay. Belize don't have an option, you know. The moment we start accepting asylum seekers, we have to deal with it. We don't have that option of may or may not. We will be housing them, probably feeding them, securing them, processing these asylum seekers that the U.S. don't want. And basically, the way it is right now, we're looking at doing this for our friends for free. Now, Madam President, this Senate is constitutionally required under Section 61A, 2A of our Constitution to authorize the ratification of treaties. That provision was never meant to turn this Senate into a rubber stamp. It was meant as a constitutional safeguard, a check and balance, not a courtesy. But what is happening today is a mockery of our safeguard. The government of Belize already signed this agreement on the 20th of October 2025, and now comes before this Honorable Senate asking for retroactive approval. I know you guys won't like to hear the truth, but please. So the question is, are we here to authorize a treaty? No, I understand, you know. But what should have been done before signing this is having consultation with the Belizean public to help them understand what is before us. Or at the very least, something we've been asking time and time again, where are the details? You knew this was coming. I'd be ashamed, Madam President, to walk into this chamber with an agreement already signed, pretend it is still up for debate. To me, this is not transparency. In fact, this is not even diplomacy from the government side. Article 2, the United States may propose the transfer of protection applicants, Belize may consider accepting. To me, this sounds polite until you realize that once ratified, the diplomatic expectation is set for the US and set for Belize, that Belize will be accepting these asylum seekers. One sign, the power lies entirely with the US, not us. I mean, once it passes for ratification today, Article 5 of the agreement, Belize agrees not to return anyone transferred here until a final decision has been made. Meaning once they arrive in Belize, they stay. Even if the process takes years. Even if they abandon their claim. Article 6. Belize must develop a new operating procedure, capacity system, and verification mechanism. To me, this translates to new bureaucracies, new costs. These things don't come for free. Article 7(4), again, which I've stated before. There's no financial commitment, or there might be, or not. We don't know. This is Belize volunteering to be the unpaid immigration assistant to the US. I started off saying that Belize is a third world country. I'd go even farther and say Belize is a small nation, man, with limited resources, and you all know that. We struggle to house our own. We can barely fund our health clinic. We can barely fund the police outpost in remote areas. In fact, not even in remote areas. Yet, we have checkpoints that no police are there apparently. But I'm not here to talk about that. Yet, here comes the government signing us up to receive and process asylum seekers rejected by a global power. And we're told it's for cooperation. What I want to know, what is the impact assessment? Where is the financial cost coming from? If it's not coming from the US, we need to know. Where is the policy paper explaining how many persons be coming in over what time frame? And I've heard you guys have said 10, but verbally, I want to see it in black and white. Not a single Belizean has been told what this means for their community. We've asked questions before coming in throughout this Senate hearing. No answers. but we have a signed agreement already. Madam President, I must commend the creativity of the drafter, because it takes real skills to write an agreement that commits Belize, or to negotiate an agreement that commits Belize to obligations without the other side committing, the way I see it, a single cent.